This is a extremely special day. My name is Kent Kleinman. I'm the Dean of the College of Architecture, Art, and Planning. Tonight I call myself Don Greenberg's boss. I can never get away with that in Ithaca. I am delighted to welcome you to this evening to celebrate the long and distinguished career of our friend Don Greenberg. I want to acknowledge many industry leaders here and many leaders of Cornell University, particularly my colleagues, Dean Lance Collins from the College of Engineering and Dean Greg Morissette from the College of Information Science. I also want to recognize Don's family members who are here, particularly Iris, who is the better half, should I say? Don's daughter, Jane, and Don's son, Eric. It's great to have you here. Thank you for being here tonight. I also want to recognize, standing to my right, the inimitable Carl Bass, recently former Autodesk CEO, member of my advisory council, not always present at the meetings, but very influential. Carl, this evening is really thanks to Carl. It was his idea, his motivation. He inspired us to act quickly and decisively. He's hosting us. He got us the space. Carl, I want to let you know that you are many things to many people, but at Ithaca, you're a huge inspiration to us. Thank you for pulling this together. Round of applause, please. So now, to answer the question that many of you are wondering about, the answer is no. And the question, of course, is Don Greenberg retiring? Don is not retiring, and I don't think he should or ever will. He is not leaving Cornell, but after, I believe it's 5 decades, plus maybe a little bit, of brilliant teaching and mind-expanding research and heckling of deans, we decided it was long past time to celebrate your amazing accomplishments. Don needs very little introduction to any of you. He is renowned as a pioneering visionary, an inspiring teacher without equal, and a fearless innovator who has made foundational contributions to the field of computer graphics, applying its techniques across disciplines that never knew they needed those techniques in the first place. He is the Jacob Gould Sherman Professor of Computer Graphics. He is the director of the Program of Computer Graphics, a program he founded in 1966. He is a professor in my college with additional appointments in computer science and in the Samuel Curtis Johnson's Graduate School of Management. He is the founding director of the National Science and Technology Center for Computer Graphics and Scientific Visualization. He has received the highest professional award in computer graphics through SIGGRAPH, the highest educational award given by National Computer Graphics Association, a member of the National Academy of Engineering. I've got about another half an hour here. Founding Fellow of the American Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering, Fellow of the Association for Computer Machinery, Fellow of the American Association for the Advancements of Science, author of hundreds of articles, which I will not name for you, and one very famous cover of Scientific America. There's always a risk of trying to characterize Don Greenberg's current work because he moves faster than the speed of any lumbering dean. He is and has always been concerned with creating digital representations that are physically accurate and perceptually indistinguishable from real-world experiences. But this is not, in my opinion, just a technical pursuit. He is always keen to the possibility that these representations are perhaps not all separate and distinct from the physical world, but parallel worlds, parallel realities. This makes Don, in my opinion, more of an ontological philosopher than a computer scientist or an architect, and I hope, Don, you won't take that term in anything but the highest sense of the word. Recent publications of his has focused on several topics, including the ability to simulate the spectral and spatial illumination from the sky, dome, and the sun, and more recently, high-speed energy simulation models for architectural designs that can be integrated into the iterative process of design, which is so fundamental to the way designers work. At Cornell Tech in New York City, he currently teaches a class called Disruptive Technology to MBA students, this year with a focus on business strategy for technologies in virtual and augmented reality. In my college, he recently taught a collaborative studio that looked at VR as an embodied technology, bringing theories, from perceptual and gestalt psychology into the world of technology to better understand the role of the body in augmented realities. This fascinating work has been supported by a number of companies, many of them represented here tonight. Let me name a few: Microsoft, Oculus, Valve, DreamWorks, Pixar, Autodesk, and of course, NSF Foundation funding as well. But I would venture to guess that Don's greatest success is you, the audience in this room tonight. Don, you are witnessing one of life's greatest achievements right here, seeing the fruition of your many years of teaching and mentoring in the accomplishments of your former students. Don, Don has taught hundreds of graduate students and thousands of undergraduate students. And he is particularly good at finding and nurturing talent, many of which is in this room tonight. A great many of you are here this evening and have gone on to become leaders in your fields in computer graphics, computer animation, computer-aided design for architecture. 6 of you have won Hollywood's Technical Oscar. 5 of you have won the prestigious SIGGRAPH Achievement Award. You are all mini Don Greenberg geniuses. Congratulations. We and I am absolutely delighted that so many of you could come out to celebrate Don's legacy. It is a legacy of 50 years of groundbreaking achievements and remarkable teaching and a lot of tennis playing as well. I'm now going to turn the mic over to my friend Carl Bass, who together with Mark Levoy and Rob Cook will continue with tonight's program. Carl, take over, please.
Thank you, sir. There's some serious negotiating going on out here about who gets to speak first, now that we've learned that Don gets the last word. We're all trying to get behind you somehow here. Okay, so I too was warned that this is not Don's retirement party. So I welcome you all here tonight to celebrate the first half of Don's career. And if you think I'm kidding, Don, because I know you appreciate a little competition and challenge, there's a professor at the University of Texas who invented the lithium-ion battery, who at age 94 has invented a much more effective battery. So your best work is still ahead of you as far as I'm concerned. Okay, I mean, these guys, I don't know what they're jockeying about their position for, but they're lobbying me here. I'm going to let them get on because they're so eager, but I just want to say a few words, a few reflections about Don, and then we'll get on with the rest of the program. So, first of all, most of you probably met Don during some kind of application process or during a class. I met Don on the basketball court. And the one thing I can tell you, he has sharp elbows. He still has sharp elbows. And I started playing with him there. And one day, we had just showered, we were sitting on the bench, and he said to me, "You're studying math or something like that." And I said, "Yeah." And at the time, it was the summertime, and I had one of those great Cornell jobs, student jobs. I was an agricultural researcher, which essentially meant I was picking rocks out of a cornfield. Studying corn in Ithaca is this crazy endeavor in which you plant plants, and so you're busy for a week, and then for 3 months they have nothing for you to do, and at the end you measure a bunch of stuff. And so in between you just pick rocks out of the cornfield. And Don instead said, "I have this difficult NASA paper, it's about hidden lines or hidden surfaces or something, and I need some, so do you want a job that paid like 3 times as much and was air conditioned?" And so I quit that afternoon. And I must say that conversation sitting on that bench in Teagle Hall is probably the most influential conversation of my life. It's a funny thing to be true, but it probably changed my life in many different directions. I was also a student in Don's class. I was a student in CS 417. Now, partially having always been the tallest kid in the class, or a little bit of the laziest student, and it was probably a combination of the two, I always sat in the back of the lecture hall. If any of you have ever been to Don's lectures, you know what a mistake that was. For the first 3 weeks, I never heard a word he said. He eventually convinced me that I needed to move to the front row to be able to understand what he was talking about. So he also made me a much better student. Slightly more seriously, I've always admired Don, very much. I think Ken said some very nice words about the accomplishments of Don's students being the greatest testament. One of the things that I think about is I always really admired Don's integrity, you could call it maybe his conviction, possibly his stubbornness about the way he went about approaching computer graphics. And it was about this honesty and really understanding how the world worked, how the physics worked, how light and energy transfer worked. And while many people took what I think is the easier route of making pretty pictures in computer graphics, Don was never willing to settle for that. And that lifelong conviction about it and to seeking out the truth and to performing science really stuck with me. And, for many years that I worked at Autodesk, what we were doing is essentially the same thing, and I never once forgot that idea of being able to build a digital model of a digital model that was a mirror image of what was going to be built in the real world. And it really was that integrity and honesty and commitment to really understanding what was going on at a deep and fundamental level that stuck with me. Also, over the last 10 years, Don and I have gotten to work together again. Don's done a fair amount of work. It's been a huge pleasure. And one of the things I think we can all take from it, I have just continued to marvel at Don's curiosity. So even as we continue to do continue to work, and when many others are taking an easier route, Don not only is curious for himself, but he pushes all of us. And I think probably for all of his students in the room, they could say at one time or another, they were really, really pushed by Don and did better work because of him. As I was thinking about Don and getting ready to say a few words, at first I thought, Don is an incredibly humble guy, and I've appreciated his humility. And at first I thought it was this great self-awareness, but then I realized it was just Iris who had kept him in check this whole time. And I was not sure that I was right. I figured I'd talk with Eric and Jane and find out if I was right. But I think Iris had more to do that with Don. So that one's off the list. We'll go back and read some more of those articles. And then the last thing I just wanted to say is, in working with him and having him as a teacher, the thing I've most of all appreciated really has been his friendship. And, starting with playing tennis. And by the way, I think in the next 2 or 3 years, I should be able to beat him. Not sure about that, but I keep trying and practicing. I've loved the meals we've shared together and the times with our families. I've really appreciated, as one of my kids makes his way through Cornell, he has a friendly face and someone to talk to and help guide him. And so it's really fun to see the next generation have the same words of advice that I did, and so I've really appreciated that. So, as both someone who I've collaborated with, someone I've done business with, someone I've learned with, and someone I've been friends with, I really appreciate all the time we've spent together, and I look forward to the second half of your career that we work together. Thanks, Don. And now, Mark Lavoie is going to come up and say a few words about Don.
So my assignment is to talk about Don's impact on academia. So there are a number of ways I could do this. I could talk about his 182 students, not including the ones that were in his classes. I could talk about the 12 who are faculty in academia right now. maybe I could build some genealogical trees. But I think what sets Don apart is that he was a pioneer, and I think we all recognize that in the very literal sense of the word. I can make a long list of firsts, that he was the first NSF-funded graphics lab, that he did the first architectural fly-through. All right, so I have to tell at least one story. So I think, as you probably all know, he did this work at the GE Simulation Laboratory. He would take a pack of students and drive up at 5 in the evening when they closed for the day, and the students would work through the night, and he'd drive them back at 5 in the morning, which caused one of Don's neighbors to say to Iris that your husband either has a mistress or is working with a computer. So he was working with a computer, and he paid for the project from some expenses from his own pocket, and including food for the students. And I know this because I was one of the students, and the food that I ordered was this, and it was at 5 o'clock in the morning on the way back from Syracuse to Ithaca. So one could continue this list of firsts forever, the first physical validation of computer graphics rendering algorithms, but let's go a little bit deeper into this notion of pioneer. So Thomas Kuhn, in a seminal book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, says of these pioneers that they've either been very young or very new to the field whose paradigm they change. Young, check, okay? And I think these posters from lectures that he gave in the late 70s talk about the cross-fertilization of fields, because there he is in architecture, but he's giving a talk about medicine. So these connections, which seem so obvious to us now, were not at all obvious at the time, which suggests that pioneer might not be the right word, because this is what I think of when I think of pioneers. And if you look closely, they're all following each other in a line along the California Trail. Well, where did the California Trail come from? It came from not a pioneer, but a pathfinder. The pathfinder is John Fremont. He discovered the passes that then became the California Trail. So at the risk of some analogies, John Fremont is an interesting character. He's brave, visionary, ambitious, controversial. He was court-martialed in 1846 for declaring himself the military governor of California. So you deans, be careful here. He was fired by Abraham Lincoln in 1861 for issuing an Emancipation Proclamation freeing the slaves in Missouri. It was a very good idea. It was a little bit ahead of its time. Thomas Kuhn captures this very well in another quote, that novelty emerges only with difficulty, manifested by resistance, against a background provided by expectation. And I think you can apply this to a lot of what happened in Don's lab. So I'll start with a humorous example. So I wrote a paint, yes, I did used to wear shirts like this. I wrote a paint program, and Alan Shimikoff, one of Don's colleagues in the Department of Architecture, gave him a set of plans and elevations and said, let me see you make a color rendering of this house that I've designed. I did with a paint program, which caused Alan Shimikoff to issue this abject decree of surrender in the face of Don's technico-magnificent operation. So I can tell a more poignant example. Don and I went to California to try to convince Walt Disney to commercialize a computer animation system that we developed. And the 9 old men were still there at Disney. And Wooly Reitherman said, well, can it do bubbles? Because bubbles were the hardest thing he'd ever animated in Pinocchio. Basically, they sent us packing. And it required that the 9 old men all retired, that the technology changed. And so 10 years later in 1990, Rob, who's about to talk, and Pixar came in with a CAPS system and really did a fantastic job of computerizing Disney. So this, I guess I'll call it a partial failure, reminds me of something that Ivan Sutherland once told me, which is that he seemed fated to do things badly, but first. And that is the essence of the Pathfinder. So let me end with a couple of more quotes from Thomas Kuhn. He talks about textbooks, and he says that they represent, or they present disciplines past developing linearly towards its present because they get rid of the stuff at the paradigm shift. So that means without all the missed paths or the failed paths. And therefore, he says that scientific training, which is based on these textbooks, is not well designed to produce the man, or presumably woman, who will easily discover a fresh approach. And a fresh approach essentially means a disruptive change. And this has been a theme of Don's career, studying and thinking about these disruptive changes and how to nurture them. And he does teach a course on this in the business school, and he talks about, in particular, disruptive changes to industry. And so at this point, I'll pass it off to Rob, who will talk about his impact on industry. Rob?
So I met Don first in Atlanta in 1978. It was a SIGGRAPH conference, and it was small. SIGGRAPH was small enough then that the whole conference could fit in the Hyatt Hotel and have room enough for a fashion convention that was going on at the same hotel. I think we were the smaller of those two. So, SIGGRAPH was new then. It was brand new to me, but Don had already been in the field for a dozen years at that point. And from the beginning, his career spanned both academia and business. I mean, he had this drive for impact that made him a natural in industry, and an instinct for insight and rigor that made him great in academia. And that's a powerful combination, because the practical needs in industry posed problems that led to academic breakthroughs. And the academic rigor led to deep solutions that opened up possibilities far beyond the original presenting problem. So the result is this lifetime of work that we see now, of groundbreaking work in both worlds. And his work is in industry, as well as academia, has spanned a lot of different disciplines. He began his career, as you know, an architect with some minor projects like St. Louis Arch and Dance Theater of Lincoln Center, Madison Square Garden. But he soon, so he worked on all those, and then soon got interested in computer-aided design to help with the architecture, and then drawn to visualization as a way to understand the stresses in cable structures. And we've talked about the work at GE and Cornell in perspective. What I find amazing is that was using hardware that was designed to train astronauts for the lunar, docking the lunar excursion module with the command module. And to see that and think about rendering using that same thing to render architectural drawings is the sort of thinking outside and thinking beyond what people do. It's the pioneer that Mark was talking about, because not many people would see a flight simulator and think of Cornell in perspective. So he's from there. He went on to obviously revolutionize animation with his work at Hanna-Barbera, but which we used, built on that at Pixar and Disney. And it's been used in architecture and engineering, art, design, ornithology, medicine, and not to mention animation and special effects. And there's, I'm sure, a lot of others things as well. And it's why you can find his students and his research at almost any technology company that you can think of. Here at Autodesk, my home is of Lucasfilm, Pixar and Disney, Google, Microsoft, HP, Apple, Wavefront, NVIDIA, SGI, Alias, Adobe, Sony, and many, many more. And it's quite a range of skills. He's sort of like the 7'2" center who's also able to have great ball handling skills. It's just not fair, And it's not fair, but it's a real gift to those of us who were his students and his associates. So, all of that is sort of, we know about Don, and it's wonderful, but it's not the main reason I love this guy. And so I'll speak for myself, but I know there are others who feel a similar way. When I met Don, I was a kid, and I was, kind of going through a tough time, was sort of lost in what I was going to do with my life. And Don somehow saw something in me that I maybe didn't see myself, and believed in me and inspired me, and truly changed my life. And mostly he did it not by what he taught in the classroom, but by who he was. And so there are three parts of that just to talk about. The first is that, Don is a kid. He's endlessly enthusiastic. He's always excited about what's next, always looking to the future, always intrigued by seeing things from new angles. The second thing about Don, and Carl alluded to this, he is stubborn. And I mean that in a good way, He's not going to give up just because other people think it's a little crazy. And the third thing about Don is that he just cares. He cares deeply. And he cares about doing work that matters. He cares about the people around him. And so even though the impact of his life is great, of his work is great, the impact of his life is even greater. He cares about having a life that matters, and in this, he set the bar very high for all of us. So thank you, Don.
Okay, so at this point, I'd like to invite Rob and Mark back, and we're going to ask Don to join us on stage.
Yeah, I owe everything to a lot of people who are in this room. And I do want to have the opportunity, I hope, if they will allow me to make some thanks, but not right now. So I'll let you start with the questions and I'll answer or comments, and I'll answer or talk later. I said I wanted the last word, Carl. I guess one thing I could say is that the bloody noses that I got from somebody's sharp elbows and the solid picks which made me go on the floor has probably been the smartest fake throwing that I ever made.
Okay, with that in mind, so who is your favorite student of all time? You don't have to include me in that. That's okay.
Well, if we're beginning to pick on each other, this wonderful dear friend who's a former CEO, I had to tell him sometimes to put on his socks when we had the fundraisers coming in that we were going to try and ask for money.
Okay, so let's move on to other topics. Okay, so Don, second half of your career, what are the most interesting things out there?
Why? I'm used to talking for 50 minutes, Carl. A comment which I would really like to talk about at greater depth, but I won't try to make so academic at a festivity here, is the fact that we've gone through 50 years of exponential growth in a digital world. And computer graphics is a mature topic today. And what I think has happened now is that the communication methods are such that everything is converging. And it's time to rethink the structure and organization of universities so that we no longer teach in silos and have the opportunity to take advantage of projects where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And this is very, very hard to do because it's hard to change the structure of universities and the tenure process. And as David Patterson from Berkeley once said, changing a curriculum in a university is a little bit more difficult than moving a graveyard. So, so I hope there's another half of my time in academia, but right now I'll take 20%.
So one thing, I never quite noticed that the barriers between the things really got in your way, but I still share the sentiment entirely. I think you did a masterful job of making things work across boundaries, certainly for the point of view of all of us.
There are a lot of people here. I hope it helped.
Yeah, it did.
The three guys are certainly three of them who did that.
Gentlemen? Share some reflections, thoughts, wishes?
I was just the one always getting elbowed out of the way. Don was maybe twice my age and not, and just could run circles around me on the court, so I just gave up.
So let me just ask you one thing, Don. Did you know when you started looking, I mean, you were a structural engineer. What made you make the leap? And did you know that it was going to be this important?
No, no way. I mean, this is all complete accident.
Yeah.
And well, you're going to cut out some of the things I was going to say later. This is an answer to your question. When I was much younger, all of you are much younger than I am right now. I think I wanted to design very good-looking thin-shell concrete structures because I loved the form and it was a tough analytical problem, and it's really what I wanted to do. And after starting in architecture and ending in engineering, serving and protecting your country militarily, although my wife would question that because of my assignment, I went to study with a man by the name of Mario Salvadori at Columbia. Mm-hmm. And Mario Salvadori is a great engineer for architecture. And he had designed the engineering for Saarinen TWA terminal. And this was what I wanted to do. So I went to Columbia to take courses for my PhD, and solving shell structure equations was solving eighth order differential equations with difficult boundary conditions. And Mario says that, you know, if you really want to look ahead, you ought to take some courses in computer programming and numerical methods, but we don't teach them yet at Columbia, so go to NYU and take those courses. So, and that was 1961. And that was great advice. And I went back to Cornell to finish my thesis because they were taking 8 or 9 years at Columbia. Everybody was going to school at night. And I had an advisor there by the name of Martin Dominguez, who was a famous architect. And Martin Dominguez worked with Eduardo Torroja and Felix Candela. And he said, Don, don't ever lose. Design is a holistic approach to the world. Don't get caught up with the technology. Keep your eye on the ball. That was the second piece of advice. And then my actual thesis advisor, because my PhD was with George Winter in the engineering school, he basically said, I don't believe any of the output from that silly computer. And whatever you predict algorithmically, I won't accept until you prove it experimentally. Okay? And I had prepared some of those remarks to say later, but the reason why I think it's important is here was somebody who was an architect. Mario was both engineer. None of them really knew very much about computer science, but from 3 different disciplines that gave me that advice. And I owe an awful lot to those people. And then the question became, how do you university? And I had a godfather who I consider my academic godfather at the university. And that was Dale Corson, the president of Cornell University. And Dale said, Don, let's start it as an interdisciplinary center. If you can get the engineers to talk to the architects, you're going to do a better job than I've been able to do. And here we are. There are, I guess, a couple of hundred people here, and here we are. So I really had some great.
So my experience at Stanford has been that a lot of the faculty there do their most creative work after tenure. You talked about the structure of the university, and I think you and I have talked about this particular issue before. So if you were giving advice to a new assistant professor who doesn't yet have tenure, what advice would you give them?
You want the practical side or the theoretical side? Because right now, the practical side, you can't start off interdisciplinary. It's too big a hurdle to place on someone today.
It's too big a risk.
It's a risk for them. And it's not their fault. It's not that they wouldn't be willing to take the risk, but the chances are lower. On the other hand, look at the luxury we're having here tonight, or I'm having here tonight. There are 3 deans here. There are three deans here from 3 different colleges, all supporting this stuff. So maybe, is that good? Yeah, I'm used to 50 minutes, you know. No, but maybe that's the reason why I truthfully, I'm not a fan of Jack Welch, the former CEO of General Electric, but he did install one type of construct which he used to give rewards and bonuses at the end of the year. And that is, you got a bonus for how much you helped another division. And boy, wouldn't that be nice if we did that in the universities?
So Don, I was struck by, you were talking about computer graphics being a mature field, you know, thinking of you as a kid. So I'm wondering if you were a high school senior now, matriculating into Cornell next fall, you know, what would you major in?
No, that's a great question. I thought of that. I think I'd major in bioengineering, or neuroscience and bioengineering. That this may sound strange, and I don't want to get too technical, but I've been working a lot in virtual reality recently. And once you're working in virtual reality, we're trying to put the human in a non-existent space, or artificial reality. And once the human is in the loop, it's going through the brain. And once it's going through the brain, we ought to try and figure out how the brain works. And so I have spent my last year and a half being a Philistine, trying to learn enough about neuroscience and the retina and how the ganglion are connected, which send the signals to the brain to derive the algorithms to change the rendering algorithms so they can not exceed the bandwidths required to do stuff in virtual reality. Could I have predicted going into neuroscience at that time? Well, I can only thank Mark for some of his remarks, or Rob for some of his remarks before. That's the real next challenge. And how do we merge the aesthetic evaluations with the technical sciences which are needed to do this don't fall into the categories of the way the university is structured. And to add, may I have the floor for another minute and a half? So one of my heroes and favorite people at Cornell was Jeff Lehman, former president. And Jeff Lehman he didn't have enough time at Cornell, but he did think that the future of the university should be broken into three categories. Wisdom in the information age, sustainability on our planet, and life in the age of the genome. And when you think about that, that's pretty sensitive. And today, I think we have to add a couple of more. One is compassion for the underprivileged, because the difference between the few who have all the opportunities and the poor who don't need to be helped to a greater degree. I think we have to have great respect for the thought processes that went on with literature and the humanities and the arts and the science. The people in computer science are so overloaded with their workload that they don't have time to take good courses outside of computer science, and I think that hurts. And last but not least, I think we have to have the sensitivity to make judgments about what we read and hear in a new world of alternative facts. I am the good Donald. So, but those are deep thoughts which are hard to change.
So another institution that I know you've complained about in the past is the academic publishing institution, and SIGGRAPH, which is the conference that a lot of us grew up with. It has nurtured the entertainment industry, which has done amazing things, but some of us think that it has become too much of a monoculture. And I know that you and I have talked about this. How do you solve a problem like that? Because that works exactly against the sort of connections that you talk about.
I don't have an answer to that problem. Is Jeff Jortner here? He had signed up because he's the representative from SIGGRAPH, actually. Well, the best way to solve it, and I hope there are many people in the audience who would do that. There are. Mark, there are probably 75 authors of SIGGRAPH papers in the room right now. Yep. You guys have to speak up. They don't want to hear an old, they don't want to hear an old fart like myself talk about it. You've got to get the youth who are willing to stick their neck out. And at least from the 60s and 70s and early 80s, every one of you who I've had the luxury of crossing paths took a risk to do this stuff. This is every single one of you. It wasn't a guarantee that you would have a job at that time. By 85, it was established, but not then. And the next generation that has to do that, it can't come from the older people saying this is what you should do. It has to be grassroots. And by the way, the grassroots is not starting in freshman year. It's not starting in high school. It's I've got to talk to my grandchildren to figure out how to do some things on my iPhone. Okay? And that's not, you're laughing about it, but I'm telling you the truth.
Oh yeah, just so things you were talking about universities, and a lot of the things that seem to not be working well anymore are things that were invented at the beginning of the industrial age, or when universities arose in response to that. And I'm wondering if you could start over and say, start with a new entirely new way to structure a university, what would that be? What sorts of things, maybe not the design, but what would be the sort of principles upon which you would design a new university system?
Rob, I can't answer that question. I don't know enough about it. I do think that we have to. I do think we have to teach the fundamentals, because if you build things on a good foundation, it can move ahead. So the first couple of years, everybody should have the prerequisites, which at least one of the languages today which one has to include is computer programming. You can't not do that, but they do that a lot in high school. But I think we have to reduce the amount of courses so students have more flexibility to spend more time in the courses they really want to. And that's not easy to do because we have this rigid set of requirements. We have tenured faculty who don't want to let go of their courses being required. And we've got a changing environment that's still following Moore's law, whether it's by parallelization or shrinking technology. So for some of the audience who may not have been students or so on, when we started the lab, and Mark was there, and Nick Weingarten is here, and Brian Barsky and George Joblow, who are now, I mean, these are all retired people, by the way, who graduated years ago. Well, many, but, we were trying to figure out what to do. And in my lab now, we have 300 million times more power than we had at the start. So how can you think that way in advance? I don't know how you can do it. I wish my stock portfolio was that way. But it's changing, and it's going to continue to change.
I mean, one of the things that is striking is just the degree to which you have crossed disciplines and department boundaries. In the program itself, one of the strengths seemed to be that it wasn't just, that it did come out of different departments and was able to do that sort of cross-fertilization that can be really productive.
I used to give some talks years and years ago, which I probably should still give, because a lot of our strength was being a tool maker. All right? And it turns out that we were solutions in search of a problem. And it turns out that the same algorithms that we used for describing surfaces and splines, okay, we used for the design of ship hulls and automobile bodies, which was the start. That migrated into CAT scans of the ivory-billed woodpecker to see whether we could actually model that, which moved into simplification of energy studies for climate change, which moved into the repair of aortic aneurysms in the medical world. That's the same problem. And I guess Rich and Elaine are both here, who helped me with that in the 60s. But it's a technique in search of a problem.
Let me do this. We've been fortunate, the three of us got chosen to say a few words. There's many other students and colleagues and friends
that
in the
wasn't such a
audience.
bad roast, Carl.
You want more?
I got my other notes.
I'm going to crowdsource some here. So is there anybody who has some? Michael, he was always the kid who raised his hand first.
Thank you. Actually, I have a prop. So I, like almost everybody in this room, really owes their career to Don Greenberg. When I first arrived at Cornell, I'm pretty sure he invited me to join the lab because I was a carpenter, and that was kind of unusual. So last week, I went back into my wood shop, which my wife calls the WOULD shop, and decided to make something for Don, and I'd like to give it to him. And you might recognize. If I can borrow your shirt.
But is it correct?
But while everybody has been talking about Don, I also want to say a few words about the real leader of the Greenberg household. As anyone who has visited Don's home knows, that's Iris. So my time in Ithaca included a Greenberg household with 3 teenagers. They were blessed with one son just starting college, destined for greatness in the operating room. A daughter wearing jangling bells and bouncy blonde curls, destined for greatness behind a camera telling stories of real life. Where's Jane? And a son soon to head off on his own journey of discovery following the Grateful Dead, destined for greatness in the halls of banking. But all that greatness was in the unknown future. And I like to think I brought Don and Iris some comfort with my own nomadic hippie life, and that somehow I had managed to come out on the other side. Despite the active family, Iris was always welcoming students to their home, making us feel at home no matter where we hailed from. There was always food to feed the hungry grad students, the reassurance that real life existed outside the lab. There was Iris's keen intellect, challenging us with thoughts on opera, art, history, medical science, the Amish, when all we seemed to be able to think about was red, green, and blue pixels. But perhaps more important than all of that was the instant awareness that when you entered the Greenberg home, it was Iris, who had grown up on the streets of New York, who was in charge here. Don was reduced to a love-struck puppy in her presence. It was perhaps this view of Don, not as the big man of the lab, returning from lunch bloodied by diving across the Sun soccer field or having taken an elbow playing basketball with the giants of the Cornell team, but here at home, vulnerable like the rest of us, that told us we too could achieve greatness, because after all, we're just human. Iris, tough as nails, and as warm and welcoming as the sunshine on that first true spring day in Ithaca. Thank you, Iris, for taking us into your lives.
Okay, that's a tough act to follow, Michael. Anyone else have any words for Don or Iris? Okay, there's a lot of handkerchiefs, I see. Okay.
May I have an opportunity to say some thank yous?
The rest of the night is yours, Don.
I have an awful lot of people to thank, and I apologize in advance if I've accidentally left some people off, and I certainly don't mean it. I'm going to stand up. I'm used to a podium, and it's much easier probably for me to talk this way. Besides the advisors who really helped, it's really a privilege to be here for a lot of people who have helped me when we got started. And of course, the advisors were the ones that really helped me personally. But then after that, we made this Cornell movie that Mark was showing. probably starting around 1968, maybe. I don't remember the exact date. 60. No, it was first made, it was first shown in 72. Yeah, because I had pictures when I went to Switzerland, so it was early in that. And, you know, that's 50 years ago almost. And you gotta realize. I'm sorry. Yeah, only the men. It was 50 years ago. It wasn't the. Okay. So I owe a lot to those people, and 7 of them are here tonight from 50 years ago, and. If I can remember correctly, Harold Montanari, Steve Snyder, John Nichols, Bill Cunningham, Alfreda Rizicki, Mark Lavoie, and Nick Weingarten, and I hope I didn't leave anyone else out. But at that point in time, that was a risk you guys took, and that really helped out. Yeah.
So I don't know if I've ever told Don this, but when we planned out the moves after we had done the modeling of the building, we used a plastic cone of vision on a floor plan of the quadrangle. After the project was finished, I buried that triangle
It's there.
at the 0, 0 point of the coordinate system, and only I know exactly where that is. It's still there.
Then there's a second, so we got our first grant, and I won't go through that, but then there's a second group of people which I really owe a lot of thanks to. And I think that the one who really got started was a very close friend and colleague who I've never lost touch with, by the name of Joel Birnbaum. And Joel was invited to give a lecture at Cornell to the computer science department because he was head of the research labs at IBM Yorktown. And he thought I was an architect, and I thought he was an engineering physicist. And all of a sudden, we're both in computer science, and he then moved to run Hewlett-Packard's laboratory. And in Joel's poignant words, which I'll never forget, after he visited my lab, he said, "Greenberg, you're a caveman." I said, "Joe, how should I take that? What do you mean?" He says, "Well, you come out of your cave and you see this gold nugget, and you bite it, and it doesn't taste good. And you smell it, and it doesn't smell good, and you take it and you throw it away." He said, "Could Hewlett-Packard work with you?" Well, that became a 20 or 30-year relationship, which turned out to be fantastic on all sides. And I think Bill Kay is here, and Frank Gruber is not here, but those 3 guys and people from Intel, as well as from Autodesk, which I'll thank Carl after. It's great when you have a luxurious academic career and you're supported by industry. So that's another whole set of support, which it takes a village, and there was a village. And the last group, which are not Cornellians, but the ones who kept my mind sane for a number of years before computer graphics was accepted, are my colleagues. Is Ed Catmull still here? And Ed is in the back. Pat Hanrahan. I don't know whether Pat's way in the back. And Rob Cook. And is Turner Whitted here? Yeah, so you guys kept me sane because you were the best, most intellectual, dedicated people in a field which was not accepted at one particular university. But I think collectively, if you look at the descendants of the students of those names which I've just thrown out, it's had a big impact on the whole industry. And the last group, of course, that I really want to thank is all the students who are in the lab. You guys made my life. And it's such a pleasure to be standing here standing vertical, not looking down on the ground instead of below ground, and having a funeral to enjoy with people who have changed my life. And I hope it continues and we can stay friends for the rest of my career. I don't want to lose touch with any one of you in each way. Yeah, people have helped me in a long way. And I greatly appreciate and want to dedicate this whole thing to you guys. So thank you very much for everything. And before the claps, I really have to thank the deans. As either Kent or Greg said to me earlier, there aren't many faculty who can get celebrated and have 3 deans be there at the same time. So to Lance and Greg and Kent right now, it's great. But Carl, I'll take elbows to my nose any other time, anytime you want. But remember that I can slam the ball at you at net. So you still have to be careful. And I have to thank you for everything you did here. And there's one a woman who I got to know very, very closely over the whole time, and that's Mari Newmer. Is Mari someplace around? She's way in the back also. Mari, thanks an awful lot. Maybe when I see the size of the crowd, it's good we didn't have all my students from all the colleges here. But and last but not least, of course, my family sacrificed a lot for me to be here. My daughter Jane is here with her husband Albert. My son flew in from Hong Kong with his wife Keiko and son Tyler. We lost a son a long time ago who's not here, if people are questioning that. And of course, my lovely bride, who I love you dearly. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Let's just end the night with a few words from one of the deans. Lance Collins is going to come give the concluding remarks.
Boy, you talk about your tough act to follow. So I understand there's an exclusion principle that doesn't even allow, the physical laws don't allow 3 deans to be in one place at one time. So we're violating a thermodynamic principle or something along that line. So my name is Lance Collins, and I'm the Dean of Engineering, one of the deans. And so I want to return to Kent Kleinman's original joke, in which he posited the answer no, and then said, what was the question, is Don retiring? So there's another, somewhat more subtle insider baseball joke that we deans are often asking ourselves, and that is Don appointed in my college? And we all just sort of shrug our shoulders. We actually don't really know. And Don has played that magnificently. So there's all of this heretical conversation around dissolving departments and colleges and whatever. And I don't even know if he works for me or not. So I have absolutely nothing to say. I just shrug my shoulders, as we all do. But in truth, we actually all steal a little bit of Don's credit. We're all happy about it, because it's like, well, he's mine. Like like everything that he does, that's part of him. That's part of the College of Engineering. So in sort of more serious tone, I just wanted to once again express my gratitude to Autodesk for this fabulous place. I mean, how is there a better place in the world to host a graphics seminal contributor like Don, and Carl Bass, of course, for making that all happen. Our other speakers who are up front, that there was, Mari and others, Daniel Bluey and June Lasordo and Serena Savino, who helped to make all of this happen. And of course, the family. And I really thank Iris for you being here, and the children, Jane and Eric, and the speakers, for all of their great comments. So I wanted to say a little bit about a little more personal comment about how I actually got to know Don. And it actually was at a moment of, in some sense, tragedy. So one of the collaborators of Don is a professor, Ken Torrance. And many of you may know Ken. Ken was a professor in mechanical and aerospace engineering who died rather suddenly and tragically, massive heart attack, while I was chair of mechanical and aerospace engineering at Cornell at the time. And I didn't really know Don all that well at that point. And so Don and I got together to think about putting together a memorial service to remember Ken. And so in the course of that, we became close. It really was a kind of bonding moment, and from then on, God, I'm even as I start to think about it, Ken was a genius in his own right in terms of his understanding of radiation heat transfer, which is a very sort of traditional engineering topic. But it turns out that radiation doesn't care whether it's heat transfer or it's light in the room, the reflections in the room, and so Ken was able to bring physical-based models into the graphical world, which was a major step forward in what we call the sort of revolutionizing what we refer to today as the CG. And I still remember, I'm going to paraphrase, I probably don't have it all that accurate, but there was a great moment in that memorial where Don was speaking to the audience, and he said, he sort of pinpointed the grandchildren of Ken's that were sitting, and they were relatively young. And so what he said was something to the effect, when you see characters like Buzz Lightyear and Woody in Toy Story and Shrek and Fiona in the Shrek series, realize that your grandfather's work helped to bring those lovable characters to life. And it was just such a sort of poignant moment, I think, in the whole thing that it always stayed with me. So Don has brought his own form of magic, I think, in some sense, to all of your lives, all of your careers. Many of you were touched, and I think he sort of represents the best of what we hope for with faculty, in that he sort of had every dimension of the job touched and at the highest level. So he was a phenomenally important creative force as a researcher, but he was an amazing educator. And I can still, there were times when I was on campus, you didn't even know I was there, and I could see you leading a band of young people across the campus. I didn't know where they were going or what they were doing, but they were, following the Pied Piper. And I would just sort of smile to myself and just see this amazing influence that you've had. So you've had that influence on your students. And then, of course, in the industry that has really been advanced by the work that you've done. It sort of touches all of those areas, and there are very few faculty that have had that level of influence. So I would like to close by just saying that, Don, it's really been an incredible privilege to work with you at Cornell, and it's a privilege to be here tonight to celebrate all of your achievements. On behalf of the entire university and alumni community, I would like to thank you and congratulate you on a career that continues to positively impact so many and continues to shine a warm red light on our beloved Cornell University.
Okay, and that concludes the evening. And so please feel free to stay around and talk. I'm thrilled to see some people I haven't seen in the last 20, 30, or 40 years. So I hope you all stay around and drink and eat, and thank you all so much for coming.